The Legend of Zelda originally released on the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1986, and this is where the story of Link, Zelda, the Triforce, Ganon and Hyrule, where it all began. So the graphics and audio may look and sound a little bit dated these days, but what jumps out to me playing through this is how current the game feels. I can only imagine playing through this as a wide-eyed kid sitting in front of the television in 1986. The Legend of Zelda, or the Zelda series, is probably Nintendo's number 2 franchise, just behind Mario as the number 1. Though it could be argued that Zelda is number 1 because the new Zelda adventure sells consoles, plus multiple Zelda entries are often cited as the best game of all time, including the Ocarina of Time, Breath of the Wild and A Link to the Past. Yeah, Breath of the Wild is a valid comparison to the original Legend of Zelda, given you're just dropped into the overworld with nothing but your wits, and you can roam around the open world freely. Now, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to get too far with just your wooden sword and shield, but it is theoretically possible, much like you can go straight to Hyrule Castle in Breath of the Wild. Well, The Legend of Zelda is a must-play for any Zelda fan, and it is really easy to play these days given it's featured on Nintendo Switch Online's NES library. So I do have a small admission, my love for the Zelda franchise started with Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. Now, yes, that may be cited as one of the worst Zelda games, but for me, it's all about nostalgia. My dad bought it for me as a gift when I was a kid. When the NES first came out, we played through it together. And this playthrough of The Legend of Zelda is actually my first time playing through the original, and I'm sorry I waited so long, because the DNA of The Legend of Zelda, it's all here. So we start out dropped onto the map, we've got nothing, although it's not too difficult to find our first item, and it's an important one too, it's our very, very first sword. So from where you're dropped into the game, you walk into the cave, and the old man will give you that famous line, "It's dangerous to go alone, take this," and he hands you your first wooden sword. So you can roam the environment, and it's quite easy to stumble upon the dungeons in the game. So you've got different environments, you've got classic environments, so you've got the beach, the desert, mountains and waterfalls too, and the game doesn't take too many prisoners either, so you only start out with a few hearts, and in true 80s style, the game is very, very hard. Before you get stuck into the dungeons, I recommend finding a few items. That includes the shield, a few heart containers, and also the white sword, which is the first sword upgrade in the game. Now, ideally, you want to go into your first dungeon prepared, especially with plenty of hearts. So for example, the sword upgrade is definitely going to make dealing with those enemies much, much easier too. One of the most delightful things about the game is the secrets. So you use bombs to find secret doors, they often result in rupees, and you burn down bushes to find secret staircases, which may lead to warp zones or the old man wanting to give the old woman a letter. I understand The Legend of Zelda was created because Miyamoto used to go for walks in the forest in Japan, and he wanted to share the sense of wonder and discovery with the Nintendo players. Well, the now familiar classic Zelda model was born in this game, so you start out with barely anything, you build up your weapons and hearts over time, and you gather more powerful tools as you progress through the dungeons, collecting pieces of the Triforce as you go. Now, you could argue that this formula was perfected in The Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past on the SNES, but it all started here. So it's also amazing how much Breath of the Wild DNA is here too, with the open world that you can explore, you can pretty much go anywhere. So in later iterations of the Zelda franchise, you are blocked off from these zones or you have to go and get items from dungeons, but here you can go a lot of places right off the bat. So we're also introduced to Lynels too, the terrifying half-man, half-beast creatures that hunted us in Breath of the Wild and were the stuff of nightmares. So they may not be as scary here, but they're definitely here, that is for sure. So the dungeons in The Legend of Zelda, they're not too tricky, perhaps until you get to the later ones. Once you get into the Lizard and the Dragon dungeons, they are 5 and 6 respectively, then the difficulty really starts to ramp up. So dungeons themselves have the classic feel to them, where you got to find the compass, the map, and also the dungeon item. So I must say, Death Mountain, the final dungeon, is absolutely fantastic, and is really quite tricky, especially if you're not leveled up. So all the classic items are here, including the boomerang, the bombs, the whistle. You've got the magic wand, and that allows you to shoot magic at enemies. There's some unique items too, including the step ladder. That allows you to cross one square on the screen, which is really useful for getting over small streams in the overworld, and very useful in dungeons for avoiding water or lava. So the boomerang item is interesting too, as when you first pick up the boomerang, then moments later, you upgrade it to the magical boomerang, and that can fly across the whole screen. But the original boomerang didn't really get too much time to shine, but you can see Nintendo here experimenting with new items. So the pacing for some of the things isn't quite right, but this is only the beginning and something they would go on to perfect in later iterations of the Zelda franchise. So there are unique parts to the dungeon as well, which is very similar to Zelda 2. So this unique view often accompanies finding the dungeon item, and the level semi-switches into a side-scroller type view of the screen. So this is something that Nintendo would fully embrace in Zelda 2 The Adventures of Link, although here in the original it is used very rarely. The main thing that jumps out to me from this game is the difficulty, so it's very much worth your time to run through and gathering items before you enter the first dungeon. So you're going to need the heart containers and the extra power of the sword upgrades. They're definitely going to help you out. So the overworld is full of danger, the enemies move quickly and in random patterns. That can get quite annoying. You've got enemies bouncing up and down, coming out of the floor, and also poking their heads up out of the water and shooting you with projectiles. Then when you enter dungeons, you've got mummies and wizards and knights to take on, and the wizards can be a particular pain, so any extra help that you can get from items and upgrades and potions is a welcome assist. So I wasn't really sure if I was going to like going back to The Legend of Zelda. I've played countless Zelda iterations since, often on the day one release. I was lucky enough to experience Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time as they came out, and back then we didn't know anything about the games. We didn't have the internet to spoil things. We did have magazines or phone numbers we could call up to get help. I don't think my parents would be too happy with that phone bill. So we didn't have our phones with internet back then, the only phone in the house within another room, and your parents paid the phone bill. So if we wanted tips or tricks we could write into magazines, but that could mean waiting weeks for an answer. The only way forward was to play and figure it all out as we went. So for all the players going back to The Legend of Zelda today, the game is pretty unforgiving and not very good at directing players through the game. Without some guidance, it's going to be near impossible to find some of the secrets in this game. Some of that was addressed in later games. For example, there isn't really much of a hint here. You have to place a bomb on the wall to find a secret cave or location, and later Nintendo provides cracks on the walls as hints. Here in The Legend of Zelda, there's numerous secret bushes to burn down, walls to blast, and you have to systematically go through all of them, one by one with items, which would be an absolutely painstaking exercise, or I could imagine you banging your head against a wall. So I 100% recommend going back and playing The Legend of Zelda for any fan of the series. So if you're interested in the Legend of Zelda franchise, then this is where it all began. You can see so much of the Zelda DNA here in the original. Not everything is done right, but you can forgive Nintendo for this being their first iteration of the formula. 35 years after the original release, it is still a magical journey, and I really can't wait to get stuck into the next adventure. Well, the game was developed by Nintendo, it was also published by Nintendo. It was originally released on the Nintendo Entertainment System back in 1986, although I played this on Nintendo Switch Online, and I recommend everyone else out there go and do the same. Well, that is it for my classic replay of The Legend of Zelda. So that was really fantastic, really good use of my time, and it's really whet my appetite for more Legend of Zelda this year. And as I say, I'm going to be playing through as many titles as I can in the series. So next up is Zelda 2 The Adventures of Link. We've got A Link to the Past to play through as well on the SNES emulator on Nintendo Switch Online. Ocarina of Time is there, and of course Majora's Mask is also coming out soon too. So look forward to plenty more Legend of Zelda where that came from. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Hit that subscribe button down below and subscribe to This Week in Video Games. Or you can follow me on Twitter at TWIVG Podcast. If you enjoyed this video, found it useful, liking and sharing the video would really help me out. Otherwise, check out the other videos on the channel. Well, thanks again, and I'll see you soon.